The sun was setting over the bustling streets of New York City, casting a warm golden glow on the sidewalks. Amidst the sea of people rushing home or heading out for dinner, an elderly black woman made her way toward a shiny glass and steel apartment building. She walked slowly but with purpose, leaning slightly on a cane that had seen better days. Her name was Evelyn Thompson, and she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the weight of years in her bones. Evelyn's clothes weren't flashy, just a simple navy blue dress paired with sensible shoes, but there was something about her presence that commanded respect. In one hand she held a small leather bag, its edges worn from years of use. In the other she clutched a set of keys attached to a keyring shaped like a tiny house, a gift from her late husband many years ago. To anyone watching, she looked like someone who belonged somewhere important. And they wouldn't be wrong, Evelyn approached the entrance of the building. Two security guards stood at their posts near the automatic doors. Both were young men, clean-shaven and dressed in crisp uniforms. They scanned the area casually, keeping an eye on passers-by. When they noticed Evelyn walking up, their expressions shifted ever so slightly. One of them tilted his head as if trying to figure out why this older woman was heading straight for their building. The other crossed his arms, his body language subtly shifting into what could only be described as on alert. Evelyn reached the door and stopped briefly, fishing out her key fob from her purse. But before she could even swipe it, one of the guards stepped forward. He gave her a polite smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone friendly enough but laced with curiosity. Evelyn paused, looking up at him. She'd been around long enough to recognize the undertone in his voice, the unspoken question lurking beneath the surface. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't the first time she'd encountered this kind of reaction, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Still, it never failed to sting just a little. "I live here," she replied simply, holding up her key fob. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried the faintest hint of pride. The guard blinked, clearly taken aback. For a moment he seemed unsure how to respond. Then, glancing at his partner, he said, "Oh, okay. Do you have ID on you? Just standard procedure." His words sounded rehearsed, almost mechanical, as if he'd said them countless times before. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her patience already wearing thin. "I've lived in this building for over 20 years, she said pointedly. "Do I really need to show ID every time I come home?" The second guard chimed in now, his tone firmer than his colleagues. "It's just to confirm, ma'am. We're following protocol." Protocol. That word again. Evelyn had heard it plenty of times throughout her life, usually when someone wanted to justify treating her differently. She sighed inwardly, knowing full well where this was going. But instead of letting frustration get the better of her, she decided to play along for now. "Fine," she said, reaching into her bag once more. As she rummaged through it, the guards exchanged another glance, their skepticism growing more obvious by the second. To them, Evelyn might have looked like any other senior citizen, perhaps someone visiting a relative or delivering groceries. What they didn't realize yet was that this seemingly ordinary woman owned not just her own penthouse unit, but the entire building itself. And soon, they would find out exactly who they were dealing with. Evelyn pulled out her driver's license and handed it over, her fingers brushing against the edge of her purse as she did so. The first guard took it hesitantly, his eyes scanning the card with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. He turned it over in his hands like he was inspecting some rare artifact, even though it was just a plain piece of plastic with her photo and details printed on it. "Mrs. Evelyn Thompson," he read aloud, his voice trailing off as if unsure what to say next. Then, glancing at his partner again, he muttered under his breath, "Does this name sound familiar?" The second guard shrugged, still standing rigidly by the door. "Not really," he said, keeping his tone casual but firm. "Maybe she's visiting someone." Evelyn heard the comment loud and clear, though neither man seemed to care whether she did or not. She let out a soft sigh, shaking her head slightly. It wasn't anger that bubbled inside her. She'd long since learned to channel that energy elsewhere, but rather a deep weariness. How many times had she faced moments like this? Too many to count. Whether it was being followed around in stores, questioned at restaurants, or ignored entirely in professional settings, these kinds of interactions were all too familiar. "I already told you," she said, her voice calm but tinged with frustration now. "I live here. In fact, I own this building." For a split second, there was silence. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. The first guard froze mid-motion, his hand clutching the ID like it might burn him. His partner shifted uncomfortably, his arms uncrossing and then crossing again as if he didn't know what to do with them. Neither of them spoke immediately, but their expressions said everything. They weren't sure whether to believe her. "You own the building?" The second guard finally managed, his brow furrowing. There was skepticism in his voice, but also a hint of nervousness creeping in. If she was telling the truth, they were in serious trouble. "Yes," Evelyn replied evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her dark brown eyes held decades of experience, of battles fought and won, of doors slammed in her face only for her to open new ones herself. She wasn't about to back down now. "Do you want me to prove it?" The two guards exchanged another glance, their earlier confidence crumbling into uncertainty. One of them cleared his throat awkwardly, while the other fidgeted with the radio, clipped to his belt. They were caught between wanting to stick to protocol and realizing that maybe, just maybe, they'd made a mistake. "Well," the first guard began, scratching the back of his neck. "If you could provide proof, that would help us verify." "Proof," Evelyn repeated slowly, almost amused by how absurd the request sounded. She reached into her bag once more, pulling out a small folder containing documents related to the property. These papers weren't something she carried around regularly. She kept them handy because she occasionally met with tenants or contractors who needed clarification on certain matters. Today, however, they served a different purpose altogether. She flipped open the folder and held it out for them to see. Inside were official records showing her name as the sole owner of the building. There was no mistaking it. The signatures, stamps, and legal jargon left no room for doubt. Yet instead of looking relieved or apologetic, the guards appeared more uneasy than ever. Their faces paled as reality sank in. "This is—" the second guard stammered, unable to finish his sentence. His colleague looked equally stunned, muttering something about needing to double-check the information. But Evelyn could tell they were scrambling now, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. As the seconds ticked by, Evelyn felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Part of her wanted to laugh at the irony of it all, the very people hired to protect her property doubting her right to enter it. Another part of her felt a pang of sadness, knowing that their reaction wasn't born out of malice, but rather ingrained biases they probably didn't even realize they had. Still, none of that excused their behavior. "I've been coming here for years," she said softly, breaking the tense silence. "Built this place from the ground up after my husband passed away. Worked hard to make sure everyone living here feels safe and respected. And yet—" She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Neither guard responded right away. Instead, they stood there shifting uncomfortably, their earlier authority replaced by shame. Passers-by outside the building started to notice the commotion, pausing to watch curiously. Some whispered among themselves while others pulled out, their phones to record the scene unfolding before them. Evelyn knew she could press further, demand an apology, or call someone higher up to deal with the situation. But she decided against it, for now. Let them stew in their embarrassment. She thought, let them sit with the weight of what they'd done. After all, this wasn't just about her. It was about every person who'd ever been treated like they didn't belong simply because of the color of their skin or the way they looked. With a quiet dignity that commanded respect, Evelyn tucked the folder back into her bag and straightened up. "Let me know when you're ready to let me inside my own home," she said simply, her voice steady and unwavering. And with that, she stepped aside, waiting patiently for the guards to come to terms with their error and prepare themselves for the consequences that would inevitably follow. The two guards stood frozen, their faces pale and beads of sweat forming on their foreheads despite the cool evening air. One of them glanced nervously at the growing crowd outside the building while the other kept flipping through the folder Evelyn had handed over, as if hoping to find some loophole or mistake in the documents. But there was none. Every page confirmed what she'd said. This elderly black woman standing before them wasn't just a resident, she owned the entire building. Evelyn watched them silently, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone spoke volumes. The guards were trapped in their own web of assumptions, and now they had no choice but to face the consequences. Their earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by a mix of panic and guilt that radiated off them like heat. "Ma'am," the first guard finally spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. We didn't mean any disrespect. We're just following protocol." "Protocol," Evelyn repeated, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. Her tone wasn't angry. It was firm, almost clinical, as if dissecting the absurdity of the situation. "And does your protocol include treating every resident like a trespasser? Or is it reserved only for people who look like me?" The question hit hard, landing with the weight of years of injustice. Neither guard could meet her gaze now. They shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact as if looking away might somehow lessen the sting of her words. A few members of the crowd murmured their agreement, nodding or shaking their heads in disbelief. Someone even called out, "Let her in already, she's the owner." But Evelyn didn't rely on the crowd for support. This wasn't about proving herself to strangers. It was about holding these two men accountable for their actions. She took a step closer, leaning slightly on her cane as she did so. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each step echoing against the marble floor of the lobby. "You see," she continued, her voice steady and clear, "I've dealt with people like you my whole life. People who think they know better because of how someone looks. People who assume I don't belong here even when I do." She paused, tapping her cane lightly on the ground for emphasis. "What you don't realize is that I've earned my place, not just in this building, but in this world, and no amount of suspicion or doubt can take that away from me." Her words hung heavy in the air, piercing through the tension like a knife. For a brief moment, the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Even the crowd fell silent, captivated by the quiet power of her delivery. The second guard finally broke the silence, stammering an apology. "We're sorry, ma'am. Truly we are. We didn't know." "You didn't bother to ask," Evelyn interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her voice softened slightly, but it still carried an edge. "Instead of assuming, you could have treated me with basic respect. You could have believed me when I said I lived here, but you chose not to. And that says more about you than it does about me." Her words struck a nerve. Both guards looked down at their shoes, unable to respond. They knew she was right, and yet admitting it aloud felt impossible. Instead, they fumbled awkwardly, trying to figure out how to fix the mess they'd created. One of them reached for the door handle, hesitating for a second before pulling it open wide. "Please come in, Mrs. Thompson," he said quickly, his voice cracking under the pressure. "You're welcome here." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by the sudden change in attitude. "Welcome?" she echoed, her lips curling into a small, wry smile. "It's my building. I shouldn't need permission to enter my own home." The crowd erupted into murmurs of approval, some clapping softly while others shook their heads in disbelief. Evelyn ignored them, focusing instead on the guards. She stepped forward, her cane clicking sharply against the polished floor as she moved past them and into the lobby. The space was luxurious, filled with sleek furniture and modern art pieces, but Evelyn paid it no mind. To her, it was simply home, a place she'd worked tirelessly to create and maintain. As she walked toward the elevator, she turned back briefly to address the guards, one last place. "This isn't over," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the room. "You may have followed protocol tonight, but your actions have consequences. Be prepared to answer for them." With that, she pressed the button for the elevator and stepped inside, leaving the guards standing dumbfounded in her wake. As the doors slid shut, she allowed herself a small sigh, leaning back against the wall. The confrontation had drained her, but it also reminded her of something important: her resilience. No matter how many times she faced discrimination or doubt, she always found a way to rise above it, and tonight was no exception. Upstairs, as the elevator dinged and opened onto her penthouse floor, Evelyn stepped out into the sanctuary of her home. The lights flickered on automatically, illuminating the spacious living area decorated with family photos, books, and mementos from a lifetime of achievements. She set her bag down on the counter and gazed out the large windows overlooking the city skyline. Despite everything that had happened, she felt a strange sense of peace, but peace didn't mean forgetting. Evelyn knew exactly what she needed to do next, and tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning, Evelyn woke up to the familiar hum of the city outside her window. The sun streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling glass panels, casting soft golden light across her penthouse. She sat at her dining table with a cup of tea, its warmth seeping into her hands as she scrolled through her phone. Overnight, the incident had gained traction online. Someone from the crowd had posted a video of the confrontation, and it had spread like wildfire. Comments poured in, some praising her composure and others calling out the guard's behavior. Evelyn wasn't surprised. In fact, part of her expected it. Social media had a way of amplifying moments like these, turning them into rallying cries for justice or debates about systemic bias. But while she appreciated the support, she didn't want this to become just another viral story that faded away after a few days. This was bigger than her. It was about accountability and change. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. After 2 rings, a deep voice answered on the other end. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said warmly. It was her lawyer, a man who had been with her through countless legal battles over the years. He'd helped her navigate everything from property disputes to discrimination cases, always standing firmly by her side. "Morning," Evelyn replied, her tone calm but resolute. "I need you to handle something for me." The lawyer chuckled softly. "Of course. What's going on?" Evelyn explained the events of the previous evening, leaving out no detail. The guard's skepticism, their refusal to let her in without unnecessary verification, and the growing crowd that witnessed it all. When she finished, there was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "They really tried to deny you entry?" the lawyer asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They did," Evelyn confirmed. "And I'm not letting it slide. Not this time." Her lawyer didn't hesitate. "Understood. Do you want me to draft a formal complaint, or would you prefer we escalate this directly to the management company?" "I'll decide once I hear what they have to say," Evelyn said thoughtfully. "But first I want them to know exactly who they're dealing with. Can you meet me at the building later today?" "Absolutely," he replied. "Consider it done." By mid-afternoon, Evelyn returned to the lobby, her lawyer walking beside her. The atmosphere inside the building felt different this time, tense, almost electric. The same guards were stationed at the front desk, though they looked visibly shaken when they saw her approach. Their earlier bravado was gone, replaced by an awkward nervousness that made them fidget uncomfortably. One of them stepped forward hesitantly, his face flushed. "Mrs. Thompson, we wanted to apologize again. We truly didn't mean—" Evelyn raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Save it," she said firmly, her voice carrying authority without raising its volume. "Your apologies won't fix what happened. What matters now is how you plan to make sure it doesn't happen again, to me or anyone else." Her lawyer stepped in then, his presence adding weight to the conversation. "My client has every right to demand answers," he began, addressing both guards. "This isn't just about a misunderstanding. It's about respect, professionalism, and ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, age, or appearance, is treated fairly." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, clearly overwhelmed. One of them muttered something about contacting their supervisor, while the other hurriedly grabbed the phone behind the desk. Within minutes, the building manager arrived, A middle-aged woman in a tailored suit, her expression a mix of concern and panic. "Mrs. Thompson," she said breathlessly, extending a hand. "Please come upstairs. Let's discuss this privately." Evelyn studied her for a moment before nodding. "Fine, but I expect action, not excuses." Upstairs in the manager's office, Evelyn laid out her demands clearly and concisely. She wasn't interested in empty gestures or hollow promises. First, she insisted on immediate diversity training for all staff members, not just the guards, but everyone employed by the building. Second, she called for stricter hiring policies to ensure that future employees understood the importance of treating residents with dignity and respect. Finally, she requested regular check-ins. The following Saturday, Evelyn hosted a community meeting in the building's spacious common area. She had sent out invitations to all the residents via email and posted flyers in the elevators and lobby. The response was overwhelming. More people than she expected showed up, filling the room with a mix of curious faces, concerned expressions, and eager murmurs. Some brought their families, others came alone, but everyone seemed united by a shared desire to understand what had happened and how they could move forward together. Evelyn stood at the front of the room, dressed simply in a burgundy blouse and black slacks. Her presence commanded attention without her having to say a word. As people settled into chairs or leaned against the walls, she took a deep breath and began speaking. Her voice was steady, warm, and inviting, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the air just days earlier. "Thank you all for coming," she started, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I know many of you have seen or heard about what happened last week. I won't sugarcoat it. It wasn't easy for me. But instead of letting it divide us, I want to use this moment as an opportunity to grow." A ripple of agreement spread through the room. Someone near the back nodded vigorously, while another person whispered to their neighbor, "She's right." Evelyn paused briefly, allowing the weight of her words to sink in before continuing. "This isn't just about me," she said, her tone firm yet compassionate. "It's about every single one of us. We live in a world where assumptions are made based on appearances, where people are judged before they even open their mouths. And yes, it happens here too, even in our own building." Her statement struck a chord. A young woman in the front row raised her hand tentatively. When Evelyn nodded, the woman spoke up. "I've lived here for 3 years, and honestly, I've never felt unwelcome until now. Hearing your story made me realize how lucky I am and also how much work we still have to do." Others chimed in after that, sharing their own experiences. An older Asian man talked about being mistaken for a delivery driver multiple times. A Latina mother recounted how her teenage son was once questioned by security for simply riding the elevator. Each story added another layer to the conversation, revealing cracks in the foundation of trust that should have existed within their community. Evelyn listened intently, nodding along as each person spoke. She didn't interrupt or try to steer the discussion. Instead, she let it flow naturally, creating a safe space for everyone to express themselves. When the room grew quiet again, she stepped forward. "These stories matter," Evelyn continued, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "They remind us that none of us are alone in this. What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a bigger pattern. And if we want things to change, we need to start by listening to each other." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone like a blanket. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked thoughtful, their eyes cast downward as they processed what they'd heard. Evelyn took a step closer to the group, leaning slightly on her cane but standing tall nonetheless. "I've lived long enough to see progress, but I've also seen how slow it can be," she admitted, her tone softer now. "I grew up in a time when people who looked like me weren't even allowed in certain neighborhoods, let alone own buildings like this one. My husband and I worked hard to break those barriers, not just for ourselves but for future generations. But moments like last week remind me that the fight isn't over." Her honesty resonated deeply with the crowd. A young man sitting near the back raised his hand hesitantly. When Evelyn gestured for him to speak, he cleared his throat and said, "It's frustrating, you know? Like no matter how far we think we've come, stuff like this still happens. How do we make sure it doesn't Keep happening. Evelyn smiled faintly, appreciating the sincerity in his question. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? She replied. But the answer starts with all of us. It's not enough to say we're against discrimination. We have to actively work against it. That means calling it out when we see it, educating ourselves and holding each other accountable. She paused, looking around the room at the diverse faces before her. We're a community, whether we realize it or not. Every person here has something valuable to contribute. So let's use that to build something better, to create a space where everyone feels respected and valued. Her words sparked a new wave of conversation. People began sharing ideas, hosting regular workshops on diversity and inclusion, setting up anonymous feedback systems for residents to report issues, and organizing social events to foster stronger connections among neighbors. One woman suggested starting a mentorship program for younger tenants, pairing them with older residents to learn from their experiences. Another proposed creating a tenant-led committee to oversee staff training and ensure accountability moving forward. As the discussion unfolded, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, a collective effort to turn pain into progress. She didn't want pity or sympathy, she wanted action. And judging by the energy in the room, she wasn't the only one ready to roll up her sleeves and get to work. When the meeting finally wound down, several residents approached Evelyn to thank her. Some shook her hand, others hugged her tightly, and a few simply expressed their gratitude with heartfelt smiles. One elderly white woman clasped Evelyn's hands in hers and said, "You've inspired me to speak up more. Thank you for showing us that our voices matter." Evelyn returned the gesture warmly, feeling a sense of connection she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she replied sincerely. "Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens because of all of us." Later that evening, as Evelyn sat in her penthouse reflecting on the day, she felt a mix of emotions. Exhaustion tugged at her, but so did a quiet satisfaction. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, she knew that, but she also knew they were off to a good start. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax, sinking into the plush cushions of her couch with a cup of chamomile tea. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was her lawyer checking in after the meeting. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice warm with curiosity. "It went well," Evelyn replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Better than I expected, actually. People care. They really do. Now it's about keeping that momentum going." Her lawyer chuckled softly. "That's all anyone can ask for. You've done your part. You always do." Evelyn nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yeah, but the work isn't done yet. Not by a long shot." After hanging up, she walked over to the balcony and stepped outside. The city lights twinkled below, a reminder of the vastness of the world beyond her building. Yet tonight, she felt grounded, not just in her home, but in the knowledge that she'd planted seeds of change. Seeds that would take time to grow, yes, but ones that had the potential to blossom into something beautiful. As she gazed out at the skyline, Evelyn whispered quietly to herself, one step at a time. The weeks that followed the community meeting brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere of the building. The management team wasted no time implementing the changes Evelyn had demanded. Diversity training sessions were scheduled for all staff members, from the front desk clerks to the maintenance crew. Flyers announcing these initiatives appeared on bulletin boards throughout the building, accompanied by heartfelt letters from the manager, apologizing for the incident and pledging to do better. But Evelyn knew that true change wasn't just about ticking boxes or holding mandatory workshops. It was about creating a culture where everyone felt seen, heard, and valued. She made it her mission to stay involved, attending the first training session herself to set an example. When she walked into the conference room that morning, she noticed the nervous energy among the staff. Some avoided eye contact, while others fidgeted with their pens or notebooks. Evelyn took a seat at the front of the room, her posture relaxed but commanding. As the facilitator began the session, she spoke up. "I'm here because I believe in second chances," she said, addressing the group directly. "What happened between us wasn't okay, but it doesn't mean we can't move forward. This isn't about blame, it's about learning. Her words seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. Slowly, people started opening up, sharing their own perspectives and fears. One young woman admitted she often felt unsure how to approach residents who were different from her. A middle-aged man confessed he'd never realized how his tone might come across as dismissive. These conversations weren't easy, but they were necessary, and Evelyn listened intently, offering guidance when needed without ever sounding condescending. Outside of the training sessions, life in the building began to transform in subtle, yet meaningful ways. Residents greeted each other more warmly in the hallways. Families hosted potluck dinners in the common area, exchanging recipes and stories over plates of food. Even the guards, once stiff and standoffish, became friendlier, making an effort to remember names and ask about people's days. It was clear that something had shifted, not overnight but gradually, like the first rays of dawn breaking through darkness. One afternoon, Evelyn found herself chatting with a neighbor she hadn't spoken to before, a single father raising two energetic boys. They ran into each other in the elevator, and after exchanging pleasantries, he thanked her for organizing the meeting. "My kids haven't stopped talking about it," he said with a grin. "They think you're a superhero." Evelyn laughed, softly touched by the comment. "Tell them real superheroes don't wear capes, they show up when it matters most," she replied. The man chuckled, nodding in agreement, and promised to bring his sons to the next community event. It wasn't just individuals who reached out to Evelyn. Local organizations did too. Word of her actions spread beyond the building, inspiring leaders in the neighborhood to invite her to speak at events focused on racial equity and inclusion. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to step into the spotlight. But then she remembered why she'd fought so hard in the first place. Not for recognition, but for progress. If sharing her story could help someone else find their voice, she decided it was worth it. At one such event, held in a nearby community center, Evelyn stood behind a podium facing a packed auditorium. The crowd ranged from college students to senior citizens, all united by a desire to learn and grow. As she began speaking, her voice carried the same warmth and authority that had captivated her neighbors weeks earlier. "I've been called many things in my life," she started, pausing briefly to let her words sink in. "Strong, resilient, stubborn." A ripple of laughter spread through the audience, easing the tension. "But none of those labels define me. What defines me is how I choose to respond when faced with injustice. Do I stay silent, or do I stand up? And more importantly, do I use my experience to lift others up?" She went on to share details of the incident at her building, emphasizing not just what happened, but why it mattered. "Discrimination isn't always loud or obvious," she explained. "Sometimes it's quiet, a glance, a question, an assumption, but its impact is less damaging. That's why we have to be vigilant, not just for ourselves, but for those around us." By the end of her speech, the room erupted into applause. People lined up afterward to thank her, some tearing up as they recounted their own struggles with discrimination. Evelyn listened patiently to each person, offering words of encouragement and reminding them that they weren't alone. Back home that evening, as Evelyn settled into her favorite armchair with a book, she reflected on the day's events. While the attention was flattering, it wasn't what fueled her. What truly mattered was the ripple effect she saw spreading outward, from her building to the wider community. Change was happening, slowly but surely, and she was proud to be part of it. As she turned off the lamp beside her and prepared for bed, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet gratitude. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, but tonight, she let herself rest, knowing she'd planted seeds of hope that would continue to grow long after she was gone. Months passed, and the building transformed in ways Evelyn hadn't fully anticipated. What began as a tense confrontation had blossomed into something far greater, a community united by shared values and mutual respect. The shifts weren't dramatic or flashy, but they were real. Neighbors who once exchanged polite nods now greeted each other warmly by name. Families, Organized weekend gatherings in the courtyard, their laughter echoing through the halls. Even the guards, once rigid and impersonal, became fixtures of kindness, always ready with a smile or a helping hand. Evelyn noticed these changes every day, whether it was the elderly couple down the hall inviting her over for tea, or the young tenant stopping to hold the elevator door open for her. Each small gesture reminded her that progress wasn't just possible, it was already happening. But she also knew better than to take it for granted. Change was fragile, like a sapling, taking root after a storm. It needed care, attention, and constant nurturing to grow strong. One crisp autumn morning, Evelyn decided to host another event in the common area, this time a celebration of everything they'd achieved together. She called it a day of unity, inviting not only residents but also local leaders, activists, and neighbors from surrounding buildings. She wanted to share their story, not as a perfect example of resolution, but as proof that even difficult moments could lead to meaningful growth. The day arrived bright and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the large windows of the common area. Tables were set up with food donated by nearby restaurants, colorful banners hung along the walls, and a small stage stood at the front of the room. Residents buzzed with excitement, some setting out dishes while others arranged chairs for the growing crowd. When Evelyn walked in, dressed in a vibrant teal dress that matched her energy, the room erupted into applause. She waved modestly, her face breaking into a wide grin. "Thank you all for being here," she said, stepping onto the stage. Her voice carried warmth and gratitude, drawing everyone's full attention. "Today isn't about me. It's about us, about what we've built together." She went on to recount their journey, from the incident at the entrance to the training sessions, the conversations, and the countless acts of kindness that followed. Her words painted a picture of resilience, reminding everyone that no challenge was insurmountable when people came together. When she finished speaking, the audience rose to their feet, cheering loudly. Some wiped away tears, moved by her message of hope and perseverance. Afterward, the celebration continued with performances by local artists, speeches from community leaders, and heartfelt testimonials from residents. A teenage girl played a soulful piano piece she'd composed especially for the occasion, while a group of children recited poems about unity and acceptance. Every moment felt alive with purpose, as if the entire room understood the significance of what they were creating. As the event wound down, Evelyn found herself standing on the balcony overlooking the city. Below, the streets bustled with life, cars honking and pedestrians hurrying past. Yet up here, surrounded by the hum of conversation and laughter, she felt a profound sense of peace. Someone joined her, a young man who lived 2 floors below. He held a cup of coffee in one hand and smiled shyly. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, his voice tentative. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Evelyn turned to him, her expression softening. "You don't have to thank me," she replied gently. "This is your victory too, all of ours." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "Still, I wouldn't have known how to stand up for myself or anyone else if it weren't for you. You showed us what courage looks like." His words lingered in the air, filling Evelyn with a quiet pride. Courage that was what this had been about all along. Not loud declarations or grand gestures, but the quiet strength to keep moving forward despite obstacles. To speak up when it mattered most, even when it was hard. Later that evening, as Evelyn sat alone in her penthouse, she gazed out at the skyline bathed in moonlight. The city stretched endlessly before her, vast and unyielding, yet somehow comforting in its constancy. She thought about the legacy she hoped to leave behind, not wealth or property, but a spirit of resilience and compassion. A reminder that change started with ordinary,